Hey everybody, my name is Daniel Marino, and this is Karate Thoughts. So I've been a karate practitioner since I was a young child. I've also been a karate teacher now for my entire adult life. And this is a series where I talk about subjects that are related to karate. So today I want to talk about training motivations. And I think this is a really important subject for people to consider and for people to talk about in martial arts, because it's really important that we're clear in our minds about what we want to get out of our training, and that we train in an appropriate way, to reach those goals and to pursue those things. So, the way I explain this to my students, even my, really young students, but to everybody in my school, is I always, break it down into, three main things that we're trying to accomplish in our training. The first is just that karate is exercise. It's something that should be good for your health. The time that you spend in the school, the time that you spend practicing, the time that you spend learning these things, the things that we practice in our art, are things that ultimately should be good for your health. Both your physical health, of course, because form of exercise, also your mental health, and the two, of course, are closely related. The body and the mind go together. I think that's just good one to lay out from the beginning, and it's a very strongly supported part of karate. If you look at the historical record, the very oldest, books we have on karate, pretty much everyone, all of the first generation karate instructors that brought the art from Okinawa to mainland Japan, pretty much all of them spoke about the health benefits of karate, and they were pretty explicit that karate is something that should make us stronger people, healthier people, more capable people. And I really do consider that the first and the foremost goal of our practice. Secondly, of course, is like practical application, things like self-defense. Obviously we want to be practicing skills, or at least I want to be practicing skills that are functional, that do work, that can help me to fight and to defend myself. Not because it's more important than the general health aspect of the practice, but just because I think that makes the practice more interesting and more meaningful to me personally. I want to have a functional understanding of martial arts and of fighting, and I want to be teaching and practicing things that do work and then can help us to defend ourselves. In the rare instance where it's something that you really need to physically fight and defend yourself, I do think that that's a very important aspect of martial arts practice, because there's so many things that we can do just for our health. If I just want to be a healthier person, I can get into weightlifting, I can get into running, both things that I actually already do a little bit, I consider a part of martial arts training. But anyway, yoga, or just learning a sport, there's so many things that people can do just to be healthier, physically and mentally healthier people. The unique, in my opinion, martial arts also have that, and also even might be the primary, benefit of our training. But something that also is very important, that it makes martial arts more unique, is that practical application side of things. You should be learning to actually fight, to actually be able to defend yourself. And lastly, and I think this one often gets overlooked a lot, especially in the kind of public discourse around martial arts, but it's just something that you should enjoy doing. I enjoy practicing karate. I enjoy learning about karate, studying the art, studying the history. It's a daily part of my life. It's something that I do every day. It's also my job, of course, and for my students too. It's something that in my school that my students and I do together. So there's also a community aspect of it. It's very important, a mentorship aspect of it. It's very important. It's something that we should enjoy doing. We should enjoy doing together in the communities that we're a part of. And that's just the basis of it, those three things. I think karate should ultimately be good for our physical and mental health. It should teach us to fight. It should teach us functional skills that can help us to fight and to defend ourselves. And it's something that we should enjoy doing, and we should enjoy doing as a community. So those are the main training motivations that I have, and the main training motivations that I encourage my students to have. And some pitfalls that I always want people to kind of to be aware of is when your training is not having a positive influence on your health. For instance, there are many people who practice martial arts, even people of all ages, that are not very physically healthy, and even though they've been practicing for a long period of time, it seems that their training is not helping them to be healthier people. And you have to acknowledge that, you have to address that, and you have to engage with it honestly. A big one is the self-defense kind of aspect of things. I think it's very important not to fall into like power fantasies with martial arts. People are like, I train for the streets, I train for life and death, like, cry, this is not a casual activity for me, this is something that, really serious about. And, listen, people live very different lives. I think especially if you have some kind of, if you work in a field like security or law enforcement, or a lot of people I know work in hospitals, like a lot of medical people to nurses especially, like there are some people that might have more of a need for physical skills that help them to defend themselves. But I'm a teacher, I run a commercial school, and I'd say for the vast majority of people, it's always good to know how to fight and defend yourself, and it's important that you address that aspect of your training and pursue it seriously. But let's be real about it, it's the kind of thing you're only going to have to do a handful of times in your life, and the most important self-defense skills are the soft skills, or the ones that are about awareness and avoidance. It's like, if you make good decisions, if you stay out of trouble, if you're aware of your surroundings, if you try not to go to places where you're likely to be more vulnerable, these soft self-defense skills are going to be far more useful in actually protecting you than any kind of physical fighting skills you can learn. The physical fighting skills for self-defense are always like a last resort type thing, is that you have no other options, you got to fight and defend yourself. And absolutely, like what we do in like unarmed martial arts has a role to play there. But again, to be honest about it, if I was really more serious about self-defense, I probably would pursue like firearms training. I of course live in the United States, which is a country where firearms ownership is both legal and common. Many people do carry firearms in this country. I mean, I just really feel like there's a very common power fantasy in martial arts that we have a tendency to overemphasize, the role that like any kind of like combative skills plays in self-defense. And we also have a tendency to overemphasize like the role that unarmed fighting skills play in self-defense. The reality is, and if you look back at this is important for understanding martial arts history as well, the vast majority of martial arts history, most of what martial arts were doing, kind of had to do with weapons. When people, as a species, as human beings, when people are like fighting for real, like lives are on the line, generally weapons are being used. That's the way that human beings fight. The unarmed aspect of things, also is important. I'm not trying to discredit it completely, especially a lot of grappling skills, what they call like weapon retention. If you carry a firearm for self-defense, it is actually pretty useful to have basic grappling skills where how to, if you're up close with somebody and there's a struggle for the weapon, for the control of the weapon, then how to engage in that kind of conflict. I'm not saying that these martial arts don't have a practical application. They certainly do. But just be careful not to overemphasize it, because then you get into the power fantasy side of things, and I think that that's not the healthiest or most productive way to engage, to pursue the martial arts. I think it's much more honest to train mostly for the health benefits and out of personal interest, and as a sport too, because you want to be an athlete and you want to participate in the sport aspect of things. I think all of these things are often much better approaches for most people. Exceptions, of course, there being many exceptions, of course, especially people that work in law enforcement or work in some kind of a security role. And but yeah, those are my thoughts on it. I'd love to know what you think, so please leave a comment below. If you have a suggestion for a topic in a future video, please leave in the comment section below, and we'll be back with more soon.